Welcome to the beginner's tutorial on how to win at risk playing with progressive cards. My name is ChampionEver, and in this video I will share the main tips and tricks you must know, and at the same time I will showcase the most common mistakes low-rank players make. Fair note, this video is straightly about progressive cards. When you play with fixed cards, there is totally different strategy, so keep that in mind. And saying that, let the video begin. Tip number 1. Attack only one territory per turn, preferably of one troop. You need to capture at least one territory per turn in order to receive a card at the end of your turn. You need to get cards so you will be able to make a set which you can trade in later on in the game and receive some extra troops. One captured territory per turn is enough. You certainly don't need to capture any more of them, well, unless you're capturing a continent or so. But what a lot of total novices tend to do, they attack as much as they can, with all of the armies they have. They become very weak, basically with no troops left at all, so they became very easy targets and being eliminated from the game in a couple of turns. So in the beginning of the game, always attack only one territory per turn, preferably of one troop if possible. Don't waste your troops making random attacks, otherwise you will quickly become low on troops and be the player who will get eliminated first. Tip number 2. Don't waste your troops on taking continents when it's obvious that you won't be able to capture them, or when you see that you won't have enough troops to properly defend them. Lots of new players quickly realize that there's no purpose to attack random territories crushing their troops, so instead of doing that, they tend to focus on going for a continent. But in a lot of cases it's the same bad thing. They completely destroy themselves going for these continents, and even after some players invade that continent, or add some troops into it, they still don't realize that it's purposeless to continue going for it. They continue foolishly wasting their troops and don't even realize how quickly weak they become, and that's probably no surprise that these players are being eliminated first. Tip number 3. Don't fight for a continent with someone else. If you see that someone is already going for a specific continent, then you don't need to add your troops there as well. Doesn't matter how much desperate you would be of going for either Australia or South America. If you fight for a continent with someone, then both of you will become low on troops and players will be looking to eliminate you for the card soon. Especially don't fight for a continent with another player when you already see that someone has a big army next to that continent, like how it isn't even obvious that you will basically clear out the continent for that player with a big army. Like look at this case, the purple and green players were so desperate to get Australia, they were fighting for it so drastically when didn't even realize that they just basically clear out the continent for blue. And here is another case. In this game the purple continues crushing green troops without even realizing that he is basically clearing out South America for the yellow player. Tip number 4. Don't be obsessed with the continents. It's fine that you won't get any of them. Well, if you see that you can capture one very easily in the beginning of the game, then of course go for it. But if you cannot, then just forget about getting a continent at all. Continents are not very important playing with progressive cards. They of course give you a slight advantage over other players, but they are nothing compared to cards. Cards are the most valuable thing when it comes to progressive card games. At first cards don't give a lot of troops, but then the value of the sets becomes extremely high and reaches even 60 troops, and no continent can match it. Seriously, do not consider continents as the main thing. Like why in the world you would crush 30 troops of someone for a continent which only gives 2 troops. In order to regain that you lost you will even need 15 turns, and the most progressive card games don't even last that many turns low. And if you crushed someone's 30 troops or any other big army in the middle of the game just to get a continent, then I cannot even say how much you have worsened the situation for yourself, into how much disadvantage you have put yourself into, and how much advantage you have given for the player who will get to take your drastically weakened player easily. And that leads us to the tip number 5. Which is, do not make your opponents weak. If you are not taking them out, then do not attack them at all. You do not want that someone would get to take your drastically weakened opponent out and get a bunch of cards for basically free, receiving tons of troops after trading that set in, and getting a huge advantage against the other players. Just generally don't attack players if you're not taking them out, even if you want to take down an army which isn't very big. In this specific game, the blue player took down 12 troops of the orange player, which turned out to be the biggest mistake ever, as the orange player, who even had 5 cards, became a very easy target to be taken out for someone else. And that fortunate player was me. After taking the orange player out, I've gained a lot of advantage, so I was able to not only finish taking the yellow player out, but the purple player and then the blue player himself too. I took all of them out in the same single turn. One critical mistake made by blue gave me the whole game. So never ever take down troops of someone unless you're taking them out. Just attack one territory per turn of one troop and that's it. Do not waste any of your troops of taking down any armies if you're not taking anyone out, as then you're not only giving advantage for someone else, but you're worsening your situation as well. You become an easier target to get taken out too. You shouldn't attack your opponents into their continents as well, as it's just a waste of troops too, which makes both of you to be taken out way easier, and puts both of you into the disadvantage towards other players. As you can see, someone will get to win in this game easily as well. Tip number 6. Which you probably already figured out if you were carefully watching. It is, focus on taking your opponents out when it's worth for their cards. That is the key tip to win at progressive card games. By taking opponent after opponent out when it's worth for their cards, you become even stronger and stronger until eventually you win the game. Cards are the most important thing when it comes to the progressive card games, and the way to get them is by eliminating other players out. After taking a specific player out, you receive their cards, and if total amount of cards you have make 5 or more, then the timer is being reset by 30 seconds and you're able to trade in a set in the same turn and continue taking your opponents out if you see it is worth that. If not done, you just simply deploy your troops and that's it. Well, if it's the endgame when it's only you and another player left, then make sure to attack that player as much as you can, taking down his armies and capturing as many territories as possible. This is how you will be able to win the endgame. Tip number 7. Never ever block your armies when it comes to progressive card games. As I mentioned before, progressive card games are all about cards which you get by eliminating your opponents out, but how do you supposed to take someone out if your all big armies are blocked? That isn't how progressive card games work. Turning strategies when you safely put your troops to one or few big armies inside your continent, leaving them blocked in order to not irritate your opponents, only works well in fixed card games, as fixed card games are not about cards, so you don't necessarily have to have your armies unleashed. But when it comes to progressive cards, your army should be always in a position and be ready to take someone out, otherwise chances for you to win are very low, so never ever block your armies. Tip number 8. Know how many territories you can capture per turn. It's important to know, because after taking some bigger of your opponent's armies down, you wouldn't like to realize that you will run out of time, drastically failing taking your opponent out, and giving the whole game for another player. Like if your opponent has over 20 territories, and it's a 60 seconds per turn game, then there are pretty big chances that you won't have enough time. If you want to find out how many territories you can capture per turn, then watch this video which I'm leaving in the info card above. It will show you the way. Also, when taking your opponent out, you need to know through how many other opponent territories you will have to go through, so when you're thinking about taking someone out, keep that in mind as well. Like sometimes players see that their opponent has less than 20 territories, so it seems for them that they can take that opponent out if they have enough troops, but that they didn't realize that they will need to go through additional other opponent territories, so since they do not take that into the account as well, they're ending up running out of time. Tip number 9. When you plan of taking your opponent out, make sure that you will be able to trade in a set in the same turn. Make sure that your current cards plus your opponent cards would make 5 or more cards in total, so you would be able to trade in a set in the same turn. Sometimes it can be worth to take someone out for their cards, But if you see that you won't be able to trade in a set in the same turn after taking that opponent out, then think twice if you should go for that opponent. If you don't have many more troops than others, if you are not spread out well enough, and if you don't have many territories, then chances that after taking your opponent out without the ability to trade in a set in the same turn, you will be taken out straightly next, are very big. So sometimes even if you see that it's worth to take somebody out, doesn't always mean that it would be a great idea. Tip number 10. Spread out well enough. In progressive card games it's important to be spread out well enough, so it will be hard to take you out, especially when it comes to 60 seconds per turn games, and at the same time you will be more suitable of taking other players out as well. It's very good to have a few different armies like in 3 different places of the map, it makes you so much harder to be taken out. Like which player would be easier to be taken out, the one who is spread out well enough, or the one who has his troops pretty much in one place? Of course the one who has his troops in only one place of the map. Also when you have multiple bigger armies in different places of the map, sometimes your troops can become blocked from some other players, and that is really good for you, as it makes you to be taken out harder even more. So generally always make sure to have a few different armies in different places of the map. Well, exception could be when you play with a bunch of low-rank players, who see the continents as the most valuable thing and want to get them at any cost, as in that case if you put some troops into the continent these players are going for, then your troops will just basically be wiped out. So if you see that all of the players are so desperate to go for the continents, then you have no other choice but just to build your troops into one big army somewhere in a neutral place. Tip number 11. Always plan ahead. You should know what are you going to do next before your next turn has even started. You should see if there's any opportunity to take someone out, and if after taking that player out, you should be able to take someone else out as well. If you don't plan ahead, then you can miss a lot of opportunities to win the game. Sometimes you could take multiple players out in the same turn, but since you didn't plan ahead, after taking one player out, you look to the map and into the player's troops counter trying to find out if you can take someone out as well, then you finally see that you can do that, but then you look at the timer and see that it will be not enough time. So to not end up in the situations like this, to never miss any of the opportunities, you should always plan ahead before your turn has even started, and be prepared to act as soon as your turn begins. The speed is a very important factor when it comes to the progressive card games and can win or lose a lot of games for you depending on how fast or slow you are. So I've just shared the key tips on how to win at Risk. By applying them into the real games, into the practice, you should start winning a lot of progressive card games, or at least stop losing so much often. I would recommend you to rewatch this video from time to time, as at first it can be very hard to obtain the whole information at once. Also eventually you can forget something important. So it would be always good to keep your memory fresh. If your goal is to dominate playing with progressive cards, then I would recommend you using this video as the main guide. It should help you out a lot. As always, special shout out goes to all of the members of the Risk Forever channel. Thank you very much for supporting me. If you guys enjoyed watching this video and willing to learn even more, then I would recommend you to start watching one of this playlists, especially Progressive Cards 1, since you probably came here for that. So you will not only know the main tips and tricks for progressive, but you will also know how to apply them into the practice as well.